Welcome to this session. If you have questions, just raise your hands. This is a small group of us, and we can go from there. So with that, I'm just going to get us started. And I think you've all been in an event where there's this one moment where you realize the plan is no longer in charge, but the clock is. There's a timeline and a deadline, and that's a moment when the decks, the docs, all the good intentions stop mattering. What you actually built either holds or it doesn't. That's the moment the story that I'm going to tell you lives on. A few months ago, this was last year around, I would say July, August, a remote group of event planners and producers and marketers. We're all from different parts of the world. We decided to stop just theorizing about what AI is and what it can do, and just use it and figure out if we can apply it to every part of the event cycle and see if it holds. And this wasn't going to be a LinkedIn post or some blog that we're going to write after. We were going to have those meetings as we went into this one planned event, broadcasted to the world. So everyone that wanted to tune in, they could also be part of the planning process and all of our fun meetings where we're trying to decide what we were going to do and how we're going to use AI and exploring and experimenting, all of that. Before we move into just a quick introduction, my name is Anca Platon Trifan. I've been 20-something years in events on the production side, on the technology side, and the last few years I've been really hands-on stress testing AI in real production environments. I'm also the host of Events Demystified podcast. It's one of the top event podcasts in technology and AI, and this year we're running the CEO edition. So if you're curious about what's behind the pretty face of any CEO that runs a technology company in events, tune in. Just released a podcast episode with Pedro Goes. He's the CEO of AIinevents, and we're going to have a few others coming out to line up. Really good conversations. I'm also the founder of the Fit for Events framework because I'm a bodybuilding athlete, and a lot of the takeaways and the discipline that I've learned under the barbell, I apply to events, I apply to leadership, I apply to everything that I do. So that's where this framework came from, because for me, this show must go on mindset is really what carries me through my training as well as the events that I work on. Okay, as I said, this experiment actually was born inside of a community. I'm part of this community called Club Ichi. It's a growing community of event planners, producers, marketers, and if you haven't heard of it or you haven't found yourself in a community where you really feel like you can receive and give, check it out. Definitely worth looking into it. So that's when we decided, okay, let's figure this out. Like, how we're gonna use AI. Let's run an AI hackathon. It wasn't gonna be an AI coding experiment, even though we did use a lot of vibe coding, and many of the people involved, they used it for a very first time. Like, they didn't know what that was before, but then they got really good at it. So the mission of the whole plan was that everything was going to be built with AI, and everything was going to be tested, and it was going to be put on real deadlines. And so the build, what we were going to do, became also the content, because we had an audience that was following along on YouTube as well as on LinkedIn. And the final event was going to be a live event late in September, right before IMAX. And I was leading the production and technology team in my comfy red robe, which meant that I was really owning the live stream, the run of show, and figuring out what breaks when speed starts to outrun visibility. So the plan was, once we committed to this, that we needed a structure. The structure came in the form of us splitting in different work streams based on what it actually takes to deliver an event. So we had a content team, we had a marketing team, technology, registration, attendee experience, production, and metrics. And at first, the early momentum was great. It felt smooth. Each team moved really quickly. People were testing AI tools. They were sharing outputs and their wins in Slack. Slack was going to be our communication platform. And so velocity felt like progress. It was great. It was fantastic. But very quickly, something else showed up. Each work stream started to move at a different speed. We had content team, which it's easy to generate content with AI. They started moving really fast. Marketing was also following along. And then we had other teams that were behind. We had the technology and production team that was moving more carefully. We're really deciding on what are we going to use and is this going to be holding under the pressure. And that difference in speed matters in events because speed without coordination leads to invisible risk. And decisions started to get made within those work streams and into individual work streams outside of the master plan, and dependencies were assumed instead of being confirmed. Now, I have to premise with the fact that when we set on to doing this thing, we did not have a project manager. So the project manager and me started screaming inside quietly because everybody was kind of doing whatever they felt like they were doing. We wanted everybody to have agency and free will and employ as many tools as they wanted, because the idea was try to use AI in every single one of those work streams. So as we were meeting weekly and discussing what each team has worked on and discussing any challenges, if they discover anything new, anything that they would want a demo that was impressive or it was an aha moment. And then we would ask questions. How does this tie to the mission? How does it tie to the event timeline? But then we also realized quickly that as we were going through this process, all those dependencies that we talked about were mostly assumed, not assigned. And one of the key takeaways here is that AI can certainly accelerate individual output much faster than it can accelerate shared understanding. And velocity, in this case, can just as much amplify misalignment. Now, nothing broke yet, nothing failed, but the conditions for failure were certainly forming. We are all working outside of our full-time jobs and our projects on doing this. So you had different people working at different speeds based on their availability. And then we had multiple tools being used. And the only thing that was fixed was the deadline. We had this deadline, we had the show that was going to happen. And that's what I think AI helped, especially when it came to the creative iteration towards this deadline. Enter Glitch Botson. This is where AI genuinely delivered. It wasn't going to be used across the whole project, but we definitely enjoyed creating Glitch as our AI bot that was going to be also a co-host that was going to be baked into the project early for content creation, for marketing purposes, but also on the production side was going to be our co-host and buffer the times we needed to switch between presenters and decks, and by creating those mini intermissions. And the question when we started looking into creating it wasn't necessarily, can we make something funny, even though that certainly crossed our mind. It was more about something practical, like, for example, can we create a consistent on-brand AI presence that supported marketing and the live experience without burning us, the humans? So with that, let me introduce you in all its glory, Glitch Botson. Now, the audio will come from my laptop because we're not tapped into the audio system here. So I hope you guys can hear. I love the quiet in the room.
Hey, event marketers, Glitch Botson here, your AI host, co-starring actual humans. We let AI plan an entire event about your world. Spoiler, the humans are brave enough to show you what happened. Join us September 24th for 90 minutes of humans and bots breaking down what worked, what flopped, and how we actually built this thing together. Brains behind the bots, built by AI, interrupted by humans. See you there.
All right, so that was that. Make sure that we get past this screen. All right, perfect. Go back to full screen. All right, there you go. So the whole idea with creating Glitch, especially in the process, as we were thinking about how we're going to make this character just move across all those work streams and keep its voice, it wasn't so much about the visual first. First, it was about who this character is. And the prompts that we fed into ChatGPT and Claude was very much tied into the event's messaging guidance and also focused on one thing, the voice, because it had to be cheeky, it had to be charming, it had to be self-aware, it had to be not snarky or condescending, and not trying to steal the spotlight. So we also automated it so that it delivers short scripts. It wasn't very polished. It was more about trying to make it sound like you are really running through this as an event professional under pressure. So the boundary set was that we wanted to have that voice stabilized before we wanted to get into the visuals. And then we got into the visuals. Make sure that I had a clicker. Oh yeah, I have a clicker. Good. So once the voice of the character came to life, then we used Midjourney to generate a simple 2D playful character. And then that character, actually, we want to make sure that it wasn't uncanny, it wasn't like super real. And that's why we end up with this character. And then that graphic was used to generate the assets in 16:9 format. We used HeyGen to take the character to life, to give it this avatar-looking visual. And then the initial clips were then edited via DaVinci so that we can just make sure that the pacing is right, the variation is right, and it was more of a human performance. I think you can use AI to generate a bunch of those pieces, but it's still the humans that have to shape what that looks like and what the delivery is. And this pattern will show up repeatedly in this project. Okay, so initially the first image we came up with was like this child-looking drawing that Heidi drew. I don't know what she used, I think Adobe. And then from there, we end up with this. And Arthur was the one that was in charge of getting the HeyGen generated and all that. So you get from this child-looking drawing to an actual Emmy-looking award winner. I have a little clip here that, let's see.
Hello, humans and half-updated operating systems. Welcome to Brains Behind the Bots.
But that was the transformation that we took it through. Okay, so this was great because we used a glitch primarily for marketing, and the marketing work stream got automated through Make and Zapier and then OpenAI API. And at first, glitch was great. It was really smart, was putting on this cheeky post, and the early results were really good. But then, slowly but surely, they went really stale, pretty fast actually. And the post started to sound generic, kind of like 80% of your LinkedIn posts that you're getting right now from AI. It was very predictable, it was very safe. And I think that's another lesson that surfaced from this entire experiment. Glitch worked best with human interruption because the raw AI output was fine for initial drafts, but it really failed as sustained originality. And the strongest posts were the ones where humans stopped that process, sharpened it, and redirected it. So in this instance, AI can certainly accelerate the creative cycle, but it will degrade quickly without human presence. So that was our main takeaway here. And then our system hit some real friction because HeyGen discontinued the voice model, so much fun, that we used for glitch. And that was like mid-project. And that mattered because voice consistency means identity, right? So losing it, we were faced with this character destabilization. And that moment mattered because we wanted to make sure that this is our one co-host. And now midway, we didn't have a co-host. It changed his voice completely. And then there was this one Slack incident where glitch went loose inside Slack and spammed the channel like every 90 seconds. It was not funny. That was like operational interference, right? Because Slack was our operational layer. So when you have a bot flooding the channel with a bunch of messages, that destroys visibility, and then it forces us to stop, to redirect, to shut it down, which we did, and that was glitch before the live event. So the day one AI bot that we had was a powerful marketing engine, but still the takeaway here is that even the most strong automations, it still needs guardrails. And let me see if I have a quick video just to get, I wonder if I embedded that.
Welcome to Brains Behind the Bots.
It's like, where is our voice? We lost it. I'm like, that does not sound anywhere like the one voice we use. So no, that was not gonna fly. Okay. Now, fast forward to September 24th, which was the show day. We were able to generate the same voice via 11 labs. And this is what I think Glitch became entirely something else. Because on stage, Glitch became our live production buffer between all the work streams that were presenting their case studies. I needed on the production side, which was run in StreamYard and fed into a virtual platform called Virtual Creative Studio, and then stream to YouTube. We needed enough time to switch between the live presenters, and we had quite a few, their PowerPoint decks, their panels, and all of that. And Glitch was pre-built to build all those intros for each one of the teams. They were very short intros, they were scripted, they were predictable. It was our little intermission. So that's where it was also very funny because it turned into the showstopper, and people in the chat were going crazy every time Glitch would come on stage. But it also solves on the production side this real show problem because I wouldn't have had enough time to go between all this live switching that was happening pretty fast. So what Glitch did in this instance, he absorbed the friction, right? So it bought me production time, but he also protected the people behind the scenes that were queuing up what was next, the presenters and all of that. So that's pretty much the story of Glitch in this instance, beginning to end. And I think the key takeaways that I want to leave you with here is AI can generate the character, but humans get to define the lane that he walks in. Automation breaks without constraints, and the most effective use, it's not always creative. It can be operational, which in this case, Glitch became. Okay, so let's move into the next crisis. Because once we had our bot hijack our communication system, the next question stopped being about creativity. It became more about execution. How do you keep a remote team on track when Slack gets noisy, when the deadlines are fixed, and work streams move at different speeds? Because Glitch taught us something early about pressure, what that looks like. But once the marketing started working and the content teams were moving fast, then something else quietly, we realized that it began to fail, and that is execution visibility. As mentioned before, because we were working as a fully remote team, we also never worked together before. We were a brand new team, brand new people that you put together in a room and you tell them to figure it out. And we all came from different parts of the industry. We all have our own share of experiences. So while we had our weekly syncs and we had Slack as our central nervous system, if we may, initially all of that hit the cracks. And what surfaced was that there was a lot of tasks that needed completed, and they all lived in threads. So the decisions that were to be made were also in all those workstream meetings that were had, and we all had access to our AI meeting notes, but there were like a lot of AI meeting notes generated, and who has the time to go through each one of those AI meeting notes, right? So that's where I feel like a lot of the ownership of who's gonna do what also lived a lot in people's heads and not necessarily in real life, in reality, or on a spreadsheet or something. And I think that's when we realized that enough of that type of friction in who's doing what, it became a little uncomfortable because we were at one point unsure if we're all going in the same direction. And that's where if there's a Slack overload, if there is a tool sprawl, and then people are assuming that someone else is in charge of this or someone else is handling, a lot of that friction can show up because we are not short of ideas. We were all working on so many great ideas. But that's when I feel like we also realized, okay, we really need a project manager, but nobody wanted to assume the role. So what I decided to do was, okay, so I'm gonna build an AI production manager that was gonna be our production manager in Slack. Not because we didn't have Notion and Trello and Asana and all the other PM tool available to mankind under the sun, is because I wanted to test AI in this new environment, and I wanted to overcome this challenge that we had in Slack. Now, for the record, Slack did not release yet the AI bots at the time, so I want to take credit that maybe they learned it from us. just for my own boasting. But we decided that this AI production Slack bot assistant was going to be doing just a very simple job inside Slack. It was gonna track what's late, what's missing, who owns what, and how many days to the show. And all of it was created via vibe coding. I took on to Claude and created an interface which looked like this, the AI interface, but then it would also send reminders every morning with what was overdue, who was in charge, what was the priority list, and all of that. What it gave us, it was clear ownership, and then it would send reminders, and then if you wanted to discover what was talked in another meeting that you were not part of, you could just chat with the bot. So that's like the solution that we figure, okay, this is gonna work. And it did, it actually did work.
Hi there, my name is Anca Platon Trifan and I was leading the production team. And I want to start by giving a big shout out to my amazing team because none of this would have come together without them. We had Peter and Michelle working hard on the VCS platform customization. Michelle built it from scratch and Peter was on the back end, hard coding all of the changes that Michelle was asking for, which was no small lift. And then Michelle also handled the Snapside integration. Jennifer trained an integrated chat base so the bot could respond with context to the user's inquiry. And then Pete kept our run of shows and agendas updated and sharp. And then Liz jumped in and she followed my instructions step by step to create the Slack app, which I then controlled through Claude Code, GitHub, and Heroku. And what makes me the proudest is that everyone on this team pulled their weight. They learned brand new skills and embraced the challenge. And this is the best team I could wish for. On my side, I was working on producing this live stream, building all the links, creating the graphics, and then most of my time really was spent on the AI production assistant itself, because when I first imagined this bot, my goal was quite a bit ambitious, I won't lie. I wanted a production copilot that could eventually run a full Q2Q of the entire show, triggering cues, overlays, and reminders automatically. Now, that was the dream, and I'll admit, I ran out of time to vibe code that piece. But what I did build was still a powerful working assistant. Instead of just being a cool demo, it turned into a Slack-based project management system. You can type in with natural language, and it would break that into structured tasks with due dates and priorities tied to our hackathon timeline. It then ran a gap analysis, flagged risk, tracked the critical path, and sent proactive reminders. And then it synced into a real-time dashboard where we could see task completion percentages, overdue items, and a live countdown to event date. Now, the process wasn't smooth. I fought through multiple rebuilds, NPM errors, Slack webhook issues, and even ngrok headaches. At one point, the bot flagged my own laptop with a 99% REM alert, which was both terrifying and oddly satisfying, proof that it was actually working. Now, from a user standpoint, the team could stay in Slack, in their workflow, and then manage their tasks without having to switch a bunch of tools. So in the end, this grew into over 3,500 lines of code, 40 commits, 40 Heroku deployments, a real system, not just a prototype. And I would say the fact that everyone embraced it, it was a really good win, and I am very proud of that. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jennifer so she can share how she trained the bot.
I'm going to talk a little bit more towards the end what this turned into, because it's no longer an AI bot anymore. It is, but it's way grown up now. So with that, I want to stop for a second because I want to get you involved. And I want to just from all of you, just as you're thinking of your own processes, and I'm sure you have your own processes better than this one. Again, very special circumstances here. By a raise of hands, how many of you lost track of maybe one committed task that you committed to during one of your last events? Nobody did. Everybody's on. Thank you for being honest. I know we've all done it, even though you're like, you have short memory right now. What I want you to do now is turn to your neighbor, find a neighbor, say hi, introduce yourselves, and then each of you get to finish this one sentence. The thing that usually breaks first under pressure is, and you get to do that right now. Don't be shy, say hi. All right, sounds like you guys have lots to share. I want to hear, if you hear me, clap 3 times. Thank you. I want to hear one of the answers. Who's the brave one to share? I'm going to pick someone. All right, go for it. Julie, you said?
Julie.
Good.
So I think my answer is a little different than what you guys are. I'm on the technology side and the ops side.
Yeah.
I did a lot of integrating Marketo, last year, their AI was down for 2 hours, meaning data from Rainfocus wasn't getting over to Marketo, people weren't getting added to campaigns, programs, leads weren't getting generated for this 2 hours, but it was still a pretty long window for all. So it's like that's when that kind of...
I have a similar story with this project.
I was like, so it broke for that short period of time. We were talking about how there was a process in place to fix all that, but it was...
That's stressful, yes. Anyone else wants to share one more? A good one.
Tag on, so
yes.
We have similar backgrounds on the tech and operations side. So where we talked about processes is when the tech breaks, as long as you have sound processes, to continue to execute the process. On event day, the emperor has no clothes. You see who has sound processes and who doesn't. And the same with people. The people in the processes are the first to break.
Yeah.
During event week.
I agree. That's why I'm like...
Yeah, same thing we were also discussing about that. Process even defined, the execution should be done right. The people needed for it to complete it.
I like that. Great answers. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, we're going to move on here because I have more to share. When AI runs ahead with our strategy, and I think one thing that we also came to be is that we definitely came to realize that AI tool power exists, but without alignment, and as we had all of our teams experimenting with AI tools, with AI agents, with vibe coding, automations, content generation, something familiar showed up, and that was people started confusing the tools with direction. Good ideas were derailed by vague prompts, and strong tools were basically producing weak outcomes because people were assuming that AI would figure it out. It didn't. And we saw it in the drafts and the content drafts. We saw it in automated run of show thinking that we wanted to use, and then it didn't work out. AI really struggled with the kind of dependency-heavy reasoning that event planners and producers do instinctively. And we do that on a daily basis. However, AI had a really hard time with it. It hallucinated order, it invented dependencies that didn't exist, and it also confidently got things wrong, and we tried to convince us that it was right. So it wasn't necessarily a model issue because we were using the latest models. It was a misuse issue because we asked AI to replace judgment instead of supporting it. And the corrective action wasn't better prompts. It was more about pulling control back to humans, and that's where the AI production assistant really helped, and it became negotiable because we wanted to use it not as an AI feature, but as a system boundary. All right, the next thing that happened was the registration page crisis. I know you've been waiting patiently to hear what happens when the registration page went up. So we used vibe coding via Replit to build the events landing page. And I have it actually here pulled up that it still exists. Right now, it leads to the watch on the replay on demand. But that was our registration page. And we had a link that would connect people. And this was all vibe coded. And we had a link that would take people to the actually registration platform. And the registration platform that we used behind that was Luma. So we had two different systems, right? We had the vibe-coded registration page that was leading to Luma. Luma was gonna be our CRM and taking people through the registration form. And that also means you can have two failure points, right? So the vibe coding of the landing page was fast, and we had Natasha that did a pretty good job on that. We had a structure, we had a flow, we had AI that helped accelerate the first pass. And then what we worked on was making sure that we lock in the details. But then what happened on registration day when we opened it, surprise, people took to that en masse, and Luma crashed. And we had those moments of a few hours where people were flooding us with messages on LinkedIn and on Slack and Instagram and all the places that they really wanted to register, but then they couldn't. And then we had to figure out, okay, so how do we troubleshoot Luma? Because we're not in charge of Luma. We are just using their platform. And that was certainly an operational incident that made us aware that this is when people really get to make hard decisions, because we had to redirect every everyone to still be able to register, still be able to get the link to the platform, but do it fast and immediately, and use all communication channels to be able to get to those that were struggling. Eventually, Luma came back up. We were able to get registration going again. But one of the takeaways was that AI can help you move fast, but it does not protect you from platform fragility, right? From APIs crashing and from things outside of your control. And then when external systems fail, then the responsibility has to snap back to humans immediately. And what matters most here goes back to processes. If this were to fail, what happens next? So as we quickly noticed that was the problem, and then we moved into motion to communicate the solution, we really got it moving, and the event didn't break because of that, but it definitely showcased the weak points, and it showcased how people are still the ones in charge, especially when the pressure is high on show day of all days. All right, the next thing that we're gonna jump into, I get my mouse here because I wanna jump over one slide. Okay. Then we had the platform. And as I said, the platform that we use, for those that were here in the beginning, was Virtual Creator Studio. And this is created by Tiki Event. And the reason why we used it is because they came to the conversation with the premise, you can do whatever you want in our platform. You can back-end code it, vibe code it, whatever you want to do it, and break it. And we want to test it under pressure. And they were basically the ones that let us do whatever we wanted with the platform. So we said, okay, we're gonna use your platform. We had a space where everybody was coming into, and then we have an expo hall, we had the main stage and the resource center. And then everything was gonna be vibe coded. And then we use Manus as the event production powerhouse. And Manus was used to create all the custom assets for the virtual platform. And that was our realization that one person can really turn into a production powerhouse with the right tool. So then we had assets created such as static images with a custom backgrounds, animated GIFs, we had video content, we had a few sponsors that were part of the expo halls, and they have virtual booths, and then we custom design each space, each sponsor space to be branded to each one of the sponsors. And that part actually worked really well. And by the way, if you ever find yourself in a pinch to create a slide deck, Manus AI is really good at it. This was created with Gamma AI, and I just noticed that it's not actually full screen. It's showing okay, that's lame. I'm not gonna stop it right now. But normally it should be full screen. But Manus really does create some really good, it's come a long way. Now that it's owned by Facebook, we'll see what happens. But it's really come a long way to create some really good decks. So that was like our space where once people registered, they would receive a magic link to get into Creator Studio. Once they were in Creator Studio, they would be able to, and we have different videos welcoming them, and I'm wondering if I have a video of that. It is on YouTube. And then it would welcome them and tell them where to go or which direction, and it was like, if this, then this, so it had some logic behind it. It was pretty cool. It really created that virtual room atmosphere. So everybody that was joining the live stream, they were, man, I love when I show all my notifications here, where all the live stream was gonna be on main stage, but you could still go to the resource center, you could do the expo hall if you wanted to. Okay. So that was that. It was great. I want to talk about another failure that we experimented, and this was with Gemini. So the run of show automation debacle. This is where another one of the AI failures showed up, because we really wanted to use Gemini to automate the creation of the run of show. And where you are in your space, you know how long it takes to create a really detailed run of show, and you probably spend a lot of time in those spreadsheets. I know I have. But the logic was just not working out because it was dependency heavy and it was very contextual, and Gemini did a really good job at making up timing and sequencing and invented transitions, and it really confidently was getting the timing so very wrong. So after several tries and instances, we decided to shut it down and go back to the old school way of using a Google Sheets Q2Q to run the show. That was manual, that was unsexy, but it worked. And that really stabilized us as far as the entire live show was going to be and the execution of that. Okay, so the show day, this was basically the system, the way it was running. And we had everyone coming into the landing page, then they were redirected to Luma for registration, and then they were getting a magic link to get to Virtual Creator Studio. And then on the production side, we were streaming from StreamYard into Virtual Creator Studio. And then for anyone that for some reason wanted to join us on mobile, because that was another thing, Virtual Creator Studio was not a mobile, does not have a mobile option. Yes, you can open it in the browser, but you don't have an app, right? So for those people, we wanted to give them the option to still join us, and they could join us on YouTube. But we wanted to keep track of who those people are, so that's how we ended up with still taking them through the process. So when you were there in that main stage view, the way it looked like here, it was like you had the stream on the screen, then you had the ability to actually get notes from Snapbar, and that was like what Botson is doing right now, taking live captions and transcripts. And then we also have the ability to get some feedback. We wanted to get metrics and feedback from everyone that was in there live. Okay, so that worked, and back to my slides here. So the next thing is, as this is the back end of, I'm not gonna stay on this long, but basically is the back end of StreamYard. So I had a lot of the graphics, a lot of the people showing up, they were presenting, and then the intermissions would be all the bot intros that I was running. It was actually really smooth. I have the preview on LinkedIn and YouTube because we went live on both. So if you want to listen to it or go and watch it, you can certainly do that. The next thing I'm gonna touch on here is Snapsite, because that was another thing that was successful. We used it as our transcript and as our live capture, not just to provide captions, but also to provide value in real time. It was providing tangible highlights and then key findings across multiple presentations, and it was displaying that in real time, so you could watch that on a separate device or on a separate browser link. And also it had this word cloud that was really cool that people could post on social with the highlights. And then this is just a document list that I'm more than happy to share with you of all the tools that we used, and also our thoughts on if yes, that's something that you should use, or it was great, or maybe not so much. And at the end, this is our aging bot.
Well, would you look at that? We made it. When this event began, I was a young, sprightly bot full of corrupted code and caffeine. And now, after a million years of AI demos, workshop games, Q&A, and one actual fire, I am but a wrinkled algorithm. My hard drive creaks when I stand. But let me tell you, what a ride. You've heard from the 7 teams who pulled this thing off. You've poked at the bots, survived my jokes, and maybe even learned a thing or two you'll actually use in real life. And hey, not bad for 90 minutes that felt like several geological eras. Before I shuffle back into the digital ether, a massive thank you to our...
Okay, I'm gonna pause it there. It goes into thanking our sponsors. We don't have time for that, but thank you, sponsors. What I wanna touch on next is metrics, because that kind of came as a bit of a challenge, because we had to decide what actually matters to track. And for our live AI hackathon, success wasn't just about numbers, it was also about the fact that we have all these people watching in real time what happens, and we had to have some quantifiable results. We had to also look at behavioral insights, how do people feel about certain things, and then we wanted to also look at perspectives and in retrospect decide what worked, what didn't. So the data that we collected was registration, attendance, drop-off points, but that didn't necessarily told us what happened, and only told us why, right? So what we wanted to capture more was engagement during the handoffs and momentum that happened between the teams and the cognitive load that was relieved if AI were to be used in real time. And those things only surfaced then later when we had time to go through all the transcripts, through all the notes, through everything, to just get the overall impression of how did everybody work together and how they used AI. And I think this is a good way in which you can also figure out really easily that AI is definitely good at accounting, but is really terrible at judgment, and numbers don't always show outcomes, right? So that's where context really matters, and that's where context explains and provides clarity during whatever the reality of that was. And without the context, the metrics would just lie, and nobody wants lying in their metrics unless you really do. Okay, so what we actually learned. When the live stream ended, our work wasn't over, as I said, because we had now all the pre-production, we had the live event, and we had a complete record of all of it. Every production meeting, every pivot, every tool experiment, every failure, and every recovery, all of those lived in transcripts and notes and all these artifacts and the Slack history. So that became what we now call the Book of How. It's not a recap, it's not a highlight reel, it's basically a decision log. Why we choose this one tool over another, why something worked in one context but failed in a different context, where AI helped and where AI didn't, where it created drag and where it created progress, where did humans have to intervene, and as we review it, we realize that there are some patterns across every single work stream. And then we layered on top the production and then the metrics, and that pattern became really consistent. Most failures weren't caused by bad tools. They were caused by system strain, by too many assumptions, by too much happening at once, by too much trust placed in automation without visibility. That's where it's available right now, and that's another tool that I'm more than happy to share because it really showcases how we work through this, what the real lessons are, what did break under the workflow and what didn't, what exposed where the workflow was fragile and what worked as far as decisions were made. So the goal wasn't necessarily to build systems that can be audited, understood, and trusted. It was more to learn the lessons, because we do know that events do fail, right? Not just in theory, but in practice. And if they fail live, that's really harsh, right? So we wanted to learn those lessons, and what we came up to be with was that do not ask what AI can do for your events, ask what your systems and processes can safely sustain. That was one of the main key takeaway. Another one was build memory, always build memory into your workflows. Design for strain, not for perfection. Always keep humans in the loop where judgment really matters. And this is how you can turn AI to be an asset instead of a liability. And also, this is how you stop hanging your team out to dry when things get really real. So with that, I have the last here slide QR code. I have a few more slides, but really the last QR code, this is what's going to give you access to the Book of How, the slides, the resources, and I have a really long list of resources that I put together for you. And if you take a second to scan it, give me some feedback, share your thoughts with me. I'm more than happy to share that. A really quick update on what happened to the Slack bot that now went into a full-fledged application. I'm actually now ready to release this to all the peoples. It's in beta, and right now it's an application that it's what I call the AI Task Manager, a full application with user authentication, teams, task categories, status tracking, and analytics that lives in Slack, Discord, Telegram, and we're working on a few other integrations. But really, and Notion is integration, but that's not necessarily a communication channel unless you wanted to. And what it helps you is really optimize creativity and optimize your processes in the places that you work. So if you work in Slack, that's the place where you can use it. If you work in Discord or if you work in Telegram, and we're going to be looking at other things like Teams and Google Meets. And I'm pretty proud of it because it's come a long way. I vibe coded this myself and I turned it into something that's usable, and it works on many different platforms. And right now, actually, I have a dev team that took on because I realized I don't have any more nights to spend on this because I was doing it on the side. But coming back to what we talked about here, I want to end with what really actually mattered to me, because this project wasn't necessarily about proving AI can plan an event. Sure, it can actually do a good job. What mattered was what happened to the humans once we stopped just looking at AI as a shortcut and really treating it as a system. Because one thing that we learned really fast is that AI cannot replace planners, producers, or judgment, and that clarity is great to have. There was also the realization that we need a better system around roles, about handoffs, about automation, where it can help, where it can hurt. And then we saw it with Glitch, how creative acceleration works, but unsupervised automation doesn't. We then saw it with the platform. AI didn't configure VCS, even though it certainly helped to create all those creative assets, but human did. Like, we decided what goes where and what. And then we saw it with metrics, because AI could generate a bunch of numbers, but it is humans that get to interpret what those numbers mean. And then we saw it in the production assistant in Slack, that it's not just about a bot, it's about what's the system. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, an event producer will always have the last say of what happens, what goes, and what doesn't. This is the team that I worked with on the production side. They are the superheroes, and they did a lot of work. Peter, he is the engineer behind VCS, and lots of credit to him, because he let us basically burn his platform down, and then he had to rebuild it. But all of this were the people that we were involved, and we were doing everything and making it happen. And I think at the end of the day, it's not AI that makes an event successful, it's the people behind it, and that's the biggest takeaway. And if you remember, I guess one thing from this one study is AI didn't make this event. As I said, it's the humans, it's the execution that always has to stay human. That's the human constant. Because sure, AI helped us move faster and generate more and capture everything, but it also amplified every weakness that we already had. And live events do not forgive ambiguity and do not forgive unclear ownership and assuming that something else is keeping things on track. So in the last thought here, I guess the future of AI in events and event production isn't so much about replacing the humans. It's really about building the systems that can protect the humans under pressure, because the tools will always change. The platforms will change, but the execution has to stay human. And with that, thank you for joining me. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn, and that's the podcast. Love to connect with you. If you have your own horror stories using AI, DM me. I want to hear them. Thank you.